I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey. And this journey is really one that I don't talk about much because it's about me. And it's talking a bit about my journey and thinking about how we create boundaries. So the first thing I want to do is to get you to think about that you're standing in front of a doorway. The path ahead is really clear. What you're looking in front of you is your future, but you hesitate. Not because there's any physical barrier, but because there's some doubt, there are assumptions, and there's this quiet voice in your head asking, do I belong here? Suddenly, there's these invisible lines that appear in front of you. There are obstacles that you have to navigate. And these obstacles aren't of your own making. They're actually more about the world and the way the world is shaped around us. And I suppose for much of my life, it's been very much around this question. And it's an unsettling question, asking, do I belong? I grew up in Birmingham from a son of Windrush parents. They came to the UK in the 1950s from the Caribbean. That's me in the middle, if you can make out. Three brothers, and I'm the youngest in the middle. I was the first in my family to go to university. And I think for me, this was back in the 1980s. And going to university, there weren't many people who looked like me that went to university. In fact, on my entire course, I was one of only 2 minorities who was on that course. So there's this quiet voice in my head and that unsettling voice asking, actually, do I truly belong here? And that can really impact how you behave in terms of how you go forward as well. And that's something I want to sort of explore a bit more with you. I think during my career, and especially, I suppose, thinking about leadership and management positions that I've been in, I've been, in most cases, or in many cases, the only sort of visible minority in the room. And that you'd think that after quite a period of time, you'd get used to that. After many years, it's something that you get used to. But I think the truth is, there are moments that sort of chip away at you where you do question whether you actually have a right to be in that room. If you can't see other people like you, then you start to doubt yourself whether you should actually be in that space. I think that was certainly my experience growing up and going through my career. And I remember this one particular moment, and it was when I was attending a management meeting. And as I walked into that meeting, it was first thing in the morning, someone said to me, where are the coffee and the biscuits? We've been waiting quite a long time now. I looked and I thought, they think I'm a member of the catering staff here. And that really shook me and impacted how I behaved within that management meeting. They didn't mean any harm by it, but actually that sort of small assumption carries quite a heavy weight in terms of those messages that come through about who really belongs in this space. And I think that's why it's really important to think about how we move beyond some of these boundaries. And I almost feel like it's something that people talk about a lot in terms of death by 1,000 paper cuts. It may not feel like a big deal at the time, but every day, these things can mount up and it can be quite a heavy burden for you. I'm sure most of you here will have heard about imposter syndrome. You may not all believe in it, but I think it's something that we do need to think about because I think it does impact all of us at some point. So even if you don't believe in it, I think there are signals that we all absorb that impacts us about whether we belong in a particular space. So for me, thinking about recruitment and thinking about being an imposter and going into that space, that's something I want to sort of touch upon in a moment. But certainly, I think being an imposter is something that I've felt in quite a few spaces. And people talk about being your authentic self. And actually, you should be your authentic self and you should be able to be who you are within the space. But then you're thinking, actually, is that helping me in terms of how I progress? Do I need to be more like the other people in the room for me to be able to progress and how I can see myself going forward with my career? So there's quite a few things that sort of play your mind. So there may be other people who are sitting around the table and they're just getting on with the business of the day and talking about things and moving on and preparing for things. You've got 101 other things that are going on in your mind as well as what's happening in front of you as well. But I mentioned about the sort of recruitment piece, and I think that's something that I think about. After I graduated, I applied and applied and applied and applied for quite a number of jobs. I attended many interviews, and I found the sort of the speed of rejection I was getting didn't make a lot of sense to me. I would find that I had the qualifications, I had the drive. Damn, I even bought a new suit for my interviews. I thought, surely I'm ready and I should be in this place. But there was something that was stopping me in terms of getting through that doorway. It was only a bit later that I found out that actually trying to understand recruitment, that it's not just about merit. It's also about perception. It's also about whether you fit in or you don't fit in. And that can really shape in terms of, shapes the potential, I suppose, in terms of what leadership looks like, what professionalism looks like, and therefore what they see you looking like as well. So it was only later that I found out that actually what we're talking about here is very much around unconscious bias. And it's something that has stuck with me. And I think it's not just within the recruitment space. I think unconscious bias can also shape teaching and learning within higher education as well. So certainly research shows that students from underrepresented groups, that actually bias can impact in terms of their assessments, their feedback, and also their expectations in terms of participation as well. So if you're consistently receiving low affirmation, lower expectations, then that's going to actually impact your confidence, your feelings and your sense of belonging, as well as your attainment as well. So I think it's quite important for us to think about positive affirmation and how crucial that is, because certainly I've seen students flourish when they're expected to succeed, where when you're talking to them, there is this expectation that you're going to do well. There's no doubt, there's no other expectation apart from succeeding. And I think that's really important in terms of looking at positive affirmation and how we can move beyond unconscious bias. As I sort of journeyed through my career into sort of senior leadership positions, I think something that I held really close and something that I still feel is really important. I don't think senior leadership is about hierarchy. It's about close control. It's about trying to make decisions in isolation. For me, leadership is very much about trust, and it's also about the team as well. Because you've got to think about empowering your team is really important, because if your team shines, you shine. So it's really important that you have that trust and you have that faith in your team in terms of how you move forward, and ensuring that there is that diversity of representation as well in terms of how you move forward, in terms of what you're trying to do in a leadership position. Now, I don't know whether many of you have seen The Wizard of Oz. Can I have a show? Yeah, I've got quite a few nods. Good. Because I think for me, leadership, something that the Wizard of Oz sort of sprung to mind in terms of leadership, and it's about the closer you get to the top and what you see, and particularly when you sort of peek behind the curtain. So I think sometimes leadership can look like this grand, polished wizardry, crystal ball gazing thing that happens. And when the closer you get to the top, and once you actually peek behind the curtain, you actually realise, actually, it's not. It's not like that. And I think sometimes people can think about putting people on a pedestal within leadership positions. I think actually Barack Obama talks a lot about this, and he talks about his journey going through Harvard and going up and actually being in a room full of world leaders. And actually for him, he said, oh my goodness, I felt that there were these clever, amazing people that I'm going to engage with. I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. But actually, once you get into the room, I think his phrase was, some are really clever, some are really amazing, but actually there's quite a lot who they're not all that. You know, they're just people, they're just humans. And I think the more we treat oil as people, as humans, the better things will be. So in terms of, let me just wrap it, in terms of how we move through that doorway, how we look and think about our future. If I start back at the beginning, so in terms of who creates the boundaries, sometimes we do, sometimes it's internal, sometimes systems do, sometimes leadership does. And I think they do that without even realizing it as well. So I think for me, it's quite important that we move beyond that boundary and go through the doorway. And a lot of that is around that positive affirmation, because actually, once you're in the room, you'll see that actually they're just people and humans who are just trying to figure things out one step at a time, the same as you. It's just getting that seat at the table. I think once you're there, you absolutely deserve to be there and deserve a seat at that table. So the last thing I say is that to move forward, you've got to think about yourself in a positive, confident way. And you've got to say, I think for me, we all belong. Thank you.